I had just sat down after folding the laundry when the news broke. The television in the corner of the room was always on. Background noise to fill the silence of our too-empty house. Chloe was at school, and Ryan, my husband, was away again on one of his endless business trips. I had gotten used to the solitude, but today the quiet felt different, unsettling. The news anchor's voice cut through my thoughts. Breaking news. A commercial flight bound for Denver has crashed. Initial reports suggest there are no survivors. I froze. My body went numb as I stared at the screen, trying to absorb the words. Denver. Ryan's plane was heading to Denver. I grabbed my phone, hands trembling, and pulled up the flight information he had sent me the night before. Flight 762. The same flight now plastered across the screen with a horrific image of burning wreckage. It was Ryan's flight. My heart pounded in my chest, threatening to break free. I tried calling him, my fingers shaking as I hit dial over and over, straight to voicemail, every single time. No, 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 I muttered to myself, pacing the room, feeling the walls close in. This couldn't be happening. Not to Ryan, not to me. Desperate for answers, I typed out a message, my fingers barely able to hit the right keys through the panic. Please tell me you're okay. Please. I stared at the phone, my eyes burning with unshed tears, praying for the 3 little dots to appear. Something. Anything. I held my breath, willing him to respond. Minutes passed. No reply. Every second felt like an eternity. I collapsed onto the couch, my mind racing with the horrific images of the crash site replaying in my head. The news said no one survived. No one. But then my phone buzzed. For a split second, I couldn't breathe. I blinked, certain I was imagining it. My hands shook as I grabbed the phone, barely able to comprehend what I was seeing. A message from Ryan. Landed. Everything's fine. We'll call soon. I dropped the phone in disbelief, staring at the words on the screen. Landed? How? The news was still blaring about the crash, showing images of flaming wreckage. How could he have landed when they said no one survived? Was this some sort of sick joke? I quickly typed back, "What do you mean? Your plane, it crashed. They're saying no survivors. Where are you?" Again, I waited and waited. No response. My mind raced with possibilities. Was this really Ryan? Was someone else using his phone? Was this some sort of twisted mistake? I tried calling again, but still nothing. Panic gripped me tighter with every passing second. Something was wrong, terribly wrong. I could feel it in the pit of my stomach, a gnawing sense of dread that told me I wasn't getting the full story. I grabbed my keys and my purse, rushing out the door to drive to his parents' house. They would know something, or at the very least, they could help make sense of this nightmare. As I sped down the empty streets, my mind kept circling back to the message. Ryan said he landed, but the news said there were no survivors. How could both be true? I called his mother on the way, my voice shaking as I told her about the crash. She gasped in horror, her voice cracking. But when I mentioned his text, her reaction changed. She paused, as if trying to piece something together herself. "Emma, are you sure it was from Ryan?" she asked quietly, her words hanging in the air like a dark cloud. "Yes, of course, it was from him. Who else could it be?" I replied, though doubt began creeping into my voice. We agreed to meet at their house, and I hung up, my knuckles white on the steering wheel. As I drove, my mind raced with terrifying thoughts. Was Ryan alive and trapped somewhere, unable to contact me properly? Or worse, was someone playing a cruel game with me? When I finally arrived at his parents' house, they were already glued to the news, eyes red from crying. I showed them the message, but his mother's face turned ashen when she saw it. "This doesn't make sense," she whispered, her voice barely audible. If the crash was that bad, how could he have sent this? I didn't have an answer. None of this made sense. That night, I barely slept. I kept checking my phone, waiting for another message from Ryan, hoping for a miracle. But all I had was that one cryptic text and the images of the crash playing on repeat in my mind. Morning came, and still nothing from Ryan. I decided I couldn't wait any longer. I called the airline, trying to get answers, only to be put on hold for what felt like an eternity. The representatives didn't know anything. They couldn't tell me why I had received that message when the flight was confirmed to have gone down. They suggested it could have been a delay in the text or even a technical glitch. But deep down, I knew it was more than that. The next few days were a blur of confusion and half-truths. Every time I tried to get in touch with someone who knew something, I hit a wall. The official story remained. No survivors. But I couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to it. Something sinister, something hidden. And then it hit me. What if Ryan wasn't on that plane at all? I used to tell myself that every marriage goes through rough patches. That every couple faces times when the spark flickers and the closeness fades. But deep down, I knew something was different about Ryan and me. Something had changed, and not for the better. It wasn't always like this. When we first met, Ryan was everything I had ever wanted. Charming, driven, and attentive. He made me feel like I was the only woman in the world, like we were partners in everything. But somewhere along the way, things shifted. He became distant. The little things that used to make our relationship special started to disappear. It began with missed date nights, then weekend trips that turned into endless business meetings, and finally, he just wasn't there, physically or emotionally. At first, I told myself it was the stress of work. Ryan had been climbing the corporate ladder for years, and the pressure was getting to him. I tried to be understanding, supportive, even when he was away for days, sometimes weeks at a time. But no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't shake the nagging feeling that something was off. The excuses were always the same. It's just this project, Emma. Once it's done, we'll have more time. Or, I'm doing this for us, for Chloe. And I wanted to believe him. I wanted to believe that the sacrifices were worth it, that this was all part of building a future for our family. But then there were the little things. The way his phone never left his side, even when we were at home. The late-night work calls that seemed to last hours. And of course, the increasing number of business trips. At first, I didn't question it. Business was business, and Ryan was ambitious. But over time, the trips became more frequent, more distant, both in location and in the emotional space between us. The latest trip, though, was the breaking point. It was supposed to be Chloe's birthday. She had been counting down the days for weeks, excited for the party we had planned together. She had even asked if Daddy would be there, and Ryan had promised that he would be. I wouldn't miss it for the world, he'd said, flashing that charming smile that used to make my heart flutter. But then, the night before, everything changed. Ryan told me he had to fly out for an emergency meeting overseas. I was furious. I didn't even bother hiding it. This wasn't the first time he had missed something important. But Chloe's birthday, that was different. You promised her, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. You looked her in the eyes and promised. Ryan sighed, running a hand through his hair, that practiced look of exhaustion crossing his face. Emma, I know, but this is important. It's just one day. I'll make it up to her. I already sent a gift, and my parents are coming to help. I couldn't even look at him. I was so tired of hearing those same excuses. The same hollow promises that never amounted to anything. I could see the guilt in his eyes, but it wasn't enough. Not this time. I don't care about the gift, Ryan, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. She cares about you being here. He said nothing, and I knew, in that moment, that he had already made his decision. He was leaving, and there was nothing I could say to change it. The next day, Ryan was gone, just like that. Off to another mysterious destination for another important meeting. And I was left to pick up the pieces, trying to explain to Chloe why Daddy wasn't there, trying to hide my own frustration and disappointment. His parents came over, just like he said they would, and the party went on without him. Chloe smiled through it, pretending like she wasn't bothered, but I knew better. She noticed his absence, just like I did. But there was something else bothering me, something I couldn't shake. The way Ryan had seemed almost relieved to be leaving, like he was escaping something, not just from the tension between us, but from something bigger. I had seen that look before, a few times over the past few months, but I hadn't really paid attention to it. Now, though, it gnawed at me. After the party, when the house was quiet and Chloe was asleep, I couldn't stop thinking about it. I sat on the couch, staring at my phone, scrolling through old messages between us. I kept asking myself the same question over and over. What was Ryan really doing all those times he was away? I had never doubted him before. But now I wasn't so sure. I looked at the flight itinerary he had sent me. The destination seemed legit, but I had seen enough true crime shows to know that not everything was always as it seemed. I resisted the urge to snoop through his things. That wasn't me. I wasn't that kind of wife. But the doubts were there, whispering in the back of my mind, making me question everything. A part of me wanted to believe that it was just paranoia, that I was overthinking things because of the stress and distance between us. But another part of me, the part that knew Ryan better than anyone, told me that something was wrong, that he was hiding something from me. I decided to push those thoughts aside for now, trying to focus on Chloe and the rest of the weekend. But that nagging feeling wouldn't go away. I kept checking my phone, waiting for a message from Ryan, hoping for something, anything that would reassure me. But when that message finally came, it wasn't what I expected. Instead of the usual apology or excuse, it was something far more cryptic. A simple, casual text that sent a shiver down my spine. Landed. Everything's fine. We'll call soon. I stared at the message for a long time, my heart racing. Something about it felt off, but I couldn't put my finger on it. And that's when the real doubts started creeping in. Had Ryan ever really left for that trip? The day after the crash, everything felt surreal, like I was walking through a haze of confusion. Ryan's text was still there on my phone, staring back at me like some cruel joke. Landed. Everything's fine. We'll call soon. But he hadn't called. The world was telling me one story. The news reporters, the footage of the wreckage, the heartbreaking list of victims being slowly revealed. But then there was Ryan's message, offering a glimmer of hope amid the chaos. It didn't add up. How could he be fine when every report said no one survived? That text should have been a relief, but instead, it gnawed at me, like a sliver of glass lodged deep under the skin. Something about it felt wrong, unnatural. I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't getting the whole story, that Ryan wasn't telling me everything. I reached out to his mother again. Maybe she had heard something. Maybe Ryan had contacted her too. But when I mentioned his message, her response only deepened my unease. I haven't heard from him, Emma, she said, her voice thin and shaky. We've been trying to reach him all night. I don't understand. If he's fine, why hasn't he called us? Something's not right. That was the understatement of the year. I could hear the panic creeping into her voice, the same panic that had taken hold of me since the moment I saw the news. We were both hanging on by a thread, hoping for something, anything that would explain what was going on. After I hung up, I sat in silence, staring at the clock, watching the minutes tick by as the shadows grew longer outside. I couldn't sit around and wait any longer. My mind raced with 1,000 possibilities, none of them good. Was Ryan lying to me? Was someone else using his phone? Or was he somewhere out there, hurt and unable to reach me? I needed answers. That night, I stayed up late, glued to my laptop, scouring the internet for flight information, crash reports, anything that could give me a clue. It wasn't long before I found the passenger manifest for Ryan's flight. My heart pounded as I scrolled through the names, my eyes scanning the list until I found it. Ryan Davis. There it was. Cold. Clinical. Just a name on a list of lives lost. But if Ryan had been on that flight, if his name was on the manifest, how had he sent that text? Why hadn't the airline contacted me or his family to confirm his death? The more I thought about it, the more the questions piled up, each one more unsettling than the last. I pulled up Ryan's work schedule, something he had forwarded to me just a few days before. He was supposed to be on a trip to meet with clients in Denver. A routine business trip, or so he had said. But now, with the wreckage still smoking and the world telling me he was gone, I wondered, was it ever really a business trip? My fingers hesitated over the keyboard as I typed his company's name into the search bar. I had never snooped into Ryan's work life before, but this was different. This was about survival. Answers. The company website pulled up quickly, but as I scrolled through the list of recent events and press releases, something caught my eye. There was no mention of a trip to Denver. In fact, there hadn't been any scheduled meetings in Denver at all. Not now, not ever. My stomach churned. The more I searched, the more the inconsistencies piled up. His itinerary, the flight details, even the name of the client he was supposed to meet. It all started to unravel. Like a loose thread, I couldn't stop pulling. It hit me like a punch to the gut. Ryan had lied to me. The realization was like a slow, creeping dread seeping into my bones. All those months of late-night calls, the endless business trips, the growing distance between us. This wasn't about work. This wasn't about a promotion or a project. Ryan was hiding something. But what? I couldn't let it go. I started checking through his emails, his texts, looking for something. Anything that would explain what he had really been doing. And then, buried deep in his inbox, I found it. A confirmation for a hotel booking. Not in Denver, but in Las Vegas. A room booked for 2. My breath caught in my throat as I clicked on the details. The dates matched his trip exactly. The room was booked for the same days he was supposed to be away for work. But who was he meeting? I scrolled further, my pulse quickening, until I saw the name. Sarah Jacobs. It felt like the floor dropped out from under me. My heart pounded in my ears as I stared at the screen, the truth finally hitting me with the force of a freight train. Ryan wasn't on a business trip. He wasn't even in Denver. He was in Las Vegas, with her. My hands trembled as I slammed the laptop shut, bile rising in my throat. I felt like I had been punched in the gut, betrayed in the worst possible way. But worse than the betrayal was the lie. He had lied to me, to Chloe, to his own parents. He had made me believe he was just busy with work, when all along he had been living some secret life with this woman. I felt sick. My mind raced as I tried to piece it all together. Why had he sent that text? Why hadn't he come clean when the crash happened? Where was he now? And more importantly, who was Ryan really? The man I thought I knew had vanished, replaced by someone who could lie to my face and make me believe it. I had to confront him. I had to know the truth. But when I tried calling him again, it went straight to voicemail. Again. That's when I knew. Ryan wasn't the victim of a crash. He was hiding. And I was about to uncover everything. The moment I found her name, Sarah Jacobs, everything changed. It was like the world tilted on its axis, and suddenly nothing was the same. I sat there in the dark, the glow of the laptop screen still burning in my eyes, feeling as if the ground had been pulled out from under me. Ryan had lied, not just about the trip, not just about Denver, but about everything. Las Vegas, a hotel for 2, and this woman, Sarah. I had never heard of her before, but there she was, a name nestled into my husband's life in ways I hadn't even realized. I thought back to all those nights he'd been working late, all the trips that never seemed to end, all the times he promised me it was just the stress of his job keeping him distant. But now I knew. I knew what he had really been doing, and I knew that Ryan wasn't in Denver or dead. He was alive. But what I didn't know was why he had gone to such lengths to cover his tracks, to keep me in the dark. I had to find out. The next morning, I called the private investigator. I hadn't wanted to resort to this before, but now there was no other option. I needed answers. I wasn't going to sit back and let Ryan keep lying to me, hiding behind this disaster. The crash had given him the perfect excuse, the perfect alibi to disappear without a trace. But I wasn't going to let him get away with it. The investigator, a no-nonsense woman named Olivia, listened quietly as I explained everything. Ryan's sudden trips, the crash, the mysterious text, and now Sarah Jacobs. She didn't seem surprised, which worried me even more. She'd probably seen 1,000 cases like mine. Husbands with double lives, wives who had no idea who their spouses really were. I'll dig into it, Olivia said after a moment of silence. It might take some time, but if there's something to find, I'll find it. That didn't comfort me. The idea that there was more to find, that I hadn't even uncovered the full extent of his lies, was terrifying. But I knew there was no turning back now. While Olivia began her investigation, I couldn't just sit still. I started piecing together the clues I already had. I reread the emails, the hotel confirmations, the vague texts from Ryan. And then I did what I had always been too afraid to do. I went through his phone records. There were dozens of calls and texts to an unknown number, always when he was away for business. The timestamps matched his trips. Sometimes they came late at night, other times right after he told me he was busy with meetings. I knew in my gut it was Sarah's number, but seeing it on paper made it real. Too real. I dialed the number. My heart pounded in my chest as the line rang, my breath coming in shallow gasps. I had no idea what I was going to say if someone answered, but after 3 rings, the call went to voicemail. There was no name, no greeting, just a cold, mechanical voice asking me to leave a message. I hung up, feeling a rush of both relief and frustration. I wasn't ready to confront her. Not yet. The days that followed were agonizing. I barely slept, barely ate, waiting for Olivia to get back to me. I kept checking the news for updates on the crash, hoping for some clue that would explain where Ryan was. But the official reports remained the same. No survivors. The wreckage had been too severe, the bodies too damaged. The crash was being treated as a tragic accident, and the world was moving on. But I couldn't move on, not without knowing the truth. Finally, Olivia called. "I've got something," she said, her voice tight with urgency. "It's not good." I braced myself. "What did you find?" "I traced the number you gave me. It belongs to Sarah Jacobs." "All right. She's a real estate agent in Los Angeles. Recently divorced. No kids. She's been seeing Ryan for at least 6 months. I've got photos of them together. I can send them to you, but I'm not sure you want to see them." I closed my eyes, fighting back the wave of nausea that rolled over me. Send them. When the email came through, my hands shook as I opened it. The photos weren't just of Ryan and Sarah at dinner or walking down the street. No, these were intimate. Ryan had his arm around her in some, kissing her in others. The most recent ones were from just a few weeks ago, before the crash. I couldn't breathe. He had been living a double life. With her. The betrayal hit me like a knife to the chest. But Olivia wasn't done. "There's more," she said, her voice low. "I did some digging on Ryan. It turns out he's not who you think he is." I pulled up some records. He's been using multiple aliases. The name Ryan Davis, your husband's name, doesn't exist. Not legally, anyway. I stared at the phone, her words not making sense at first. "What do you mean?" "I mean that the man you married isn't who he says he is. His real name is Ryan Parker. He's got a trail of debts, failed businesses, and fraud cases under that name. And from what I can tell, he's been planning this disappearance for a while. The crash? I think he used it to fake his own death." The room spun around me. I felt like I was going to pass out. My husband, the father of my child, had faked his own death to escape. What? His past? His lies? And Sarah? Was she part of this? Or just another victim? "I don't understand," I whispered, gripping the phone like a lifeline. "Why would he do this?" Olivia sighed. "People like Ryan. People who live these kinds of double lives. They don't think like the rest of us. He was probably trying to escape his old life, start fresh with this woman Sarah. The crash gave him the perfect opportunity. But the fact that he texted you, I think that was a mistake. Maybe he didn't plan everything as perfectly as he thought." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Ryan wasn't dead. He was alive, but he had used a tragedy, a real tragedy, to fake his own death and leave me behind, to leave Chloe behind. I hung up with Olivia, numb and shaking. I had so many questions, but one thing was clear. I had to confront Ryan. I couldn't let him get away with this, not after everything he'd done. I packed a bag, my mind made up. I was going to find him. I didn't care what it took. Ryan thought he could disappear, but he was wrong. I would uncover every lie, and when I found him, I would make sure he knew the one thing he could never escape. I stood in front of the small, nondescript motel, gripping the handle of my suitcase. The wind whipped through the parking lot, tossing my hair around as I stared at the faded, blinking neon sign above. This was where Ryan had hidden himself. This rundown place, miles away from the life we had built together. He thought he could run. But I found him. My heart pounded as I stepped forward, my mind racing with everything I had discovered over the past few days. The lies, the fake names, the affair with Sarah, and worst of all, the calculated decision to fake his own death in that crash. He had left me, left Chloe, left everything we'd ever known, without a second thought. And for what? A new life. Freedom? The thought sent a surge of anger through me, one that I had barely kept in check since discovering the truth. But I wasn't here to scream. I wasn't here to cry. I was here for answers. I had called his name. Ryan Parker, not Ryan Davis, not the man I thought I had married, at the front desk, and the bored-looking clerk had pointed me to room 207. He didn't ask questions. This was the kind of place where people came to disappear, and I supposed Ryan had fit right in. My hand shook as I knocked on the door. For a moment, I thought about turning back, about walking away and letting him believe he had gotten away with it. But that wasn't an option. Not anymore. Not after what he had done. The door creaked open slowly, and there he was. Ryan, or whatever his name really was, stood there, his face a mask of surprise. For a split second, he looked almost relieved to see me. But then his expression shifted to something colder, something harder. "Emma," he said, his voice low. He glanced over my shoulder, as if expecting someone else to be with me. "How did you find me? How do you think?" I replied, my voice trembling with barely restrained fury. "You're not as good at disappearing as you think you are." He stepped aside, motioning for me to come in. I hesitated, my instincts screaming at me not to cross the threshold, but I had come this far. I wasn't leaving without the truth. The room was sparse, almost sterile, with a single bed, a suitcase tossed in the corner, and papers strewn across the small table by the window. I wondered how long he had been holed up here, hiding from his past, hiding from me. He shut the door behind me, and I heard the click of the lock sliding into place. My heart raced. Was I really doing this? Was I really standing here, face to face with the man who had shattered my life? "You lied to me," I said, turning to face him. The words came out sharper than I intended, but I didn't care. About everything. He ran a hand through his hair, looking tired, but there was no remorse in his eyes. "Emma, it's not what you think." "Not what I think." I let out a bitter laugh. "You faked your own death, Ryan. You left me and Chloe to believe you were dead. And all for what? A clean slate? A new life with Sarah." His face tightened at the mention of her name. "It's more complicated than that." "Is it?" I stepped closer, feeling the anger I had been holding in finally bubble to the surface. "You didn't even have the decency to tell me. You just sent me a text, like it was nothing. Like you hadn't just blown up our entire life." "I didn't want to hurt you," he said, his voice softer now, almost pleading. "You have to understand." "Understand?" I cut him off, my voice shaking. "Understand what?" "That you've been lying to me since the day we met. That our entire marriage was a sham. That you've been planning this escape for months, maybe years. You used the crash, Ryan. You used a tragedy to fake your death. Who does that?" He didn't answer. Instead, he walked over to the table and picked up one of the papers. "You're right," he said after a long silence. "I've lied about a lot of things, and you deserve the truth, but the truth isn't what you think it is." I crossed my arms, narrowing my eyes. "So tell me, what is the truth?" He handed me the paper. It was a newspaper article, old and yellowed, about a man named Ryan Parker who had been involved in a series of fraud cases a decade ago. A man who had stolen millions and disappeared. The photo looked eerily like Ryan, my Ryan, but the dates didn't match. It didn't make sense. "I wasn't always Ryan Davis," he began, his voice steady but distant. "Before we met, I was Ryan Parker. I was involved in some things I didn't want you to know about. I tried to start over, Emma, I really did. But my past kept catching up to me. The people I was involved with, they weren't the kind of people you can just walk away from. So what? You're a criminal? I spat, my voice full of disbelief. This whole time, you were living some double life. I wasn't living it, Emma. I was running from it. But I couldn't run forever. He looked down, the weight of his words heavy in the air. The crash. It was the perfect out. They think I'm dead now. They think Ryan Parker is gone. And what about Ryan Davis? What about me? What about Chloe? My voice broke as I said her name. He flinched, as if hearing her name hurt him. I didn't want you to get hurt. That's why I left. I knew that if I stayed, they'd come after you too. So you just left us. Without warning? Without even a goodbye? I didn't have a choice, Emma. Yes, you did. I shouted, stepping forward. You always had a choice. And you chose her. His eyes flashed with something. Guilt, regret, maybe even anger. Sarah has nothing to do with this. Don't lie to me again, I said, my voice lowering to a dangerous whisper. I know everything. I know about her. I know about the hotel. I know you've been seeing her for months. He didn't deny it. He just stood there, silent, the weight of his betrayal hanging between us like a noose. I shook my head, feeling the tears welling up in my eyes, but I refused to let them fall. You destroyed everything. For what? To escape your past? To be with her? He took a step toward me, his expression softening. Emma, I loved you. I still do. Don't. I held up a hand to stop him. Don't say that. Not after everything. The room felt smaller, the air thicker. I could feel the walls closing in, the weight of everything pressing down on me. I had come here for answers, but now that I had them, I wasn't sure what to do with them. Ryan reached for my hand, but I pulled away. You don't get to touch me. Not anymore. He stared at me for a long moment, and then finally he nodded. I understand. But he didn't. He never had. I turned toward the door, my heart pounding, ready to leave this nightmare behind. But as I reached for the handle, I stopped. There was one more thing I needed to say. You didn't just betray me, Ryan. You betrayed Chloe. And she'll never forgive you for that. With that, I walked out, not looking back. The storm had passed, but the wreckage remained, and I was the only one left to pick up the pieces.